effect. I believe we are, or we should be 100% live. 100%. Yo, we out here, we outside. Yes, we are. Yeah, we gotta take a stroll back in the neighborhood and wait. That didn't seem right. What I just saw didn't seem right. It didn't seem like it was on the right. Like it was on the right. Hold up. We gonna get this right. Yeah, we gonna get this right. We gonna get this right. I gotta first off. I gotta play my intros.
All right.
I gotta play my intros.
Shut up, you dumb, you sound like a coon. Get out, stay clear of this room. We proud, we black, rich, and forever stay paid. They lies and killing spraying from the soil they mislaid. Their tales a sham, cooked up by scammers who toil. So shut up, chief X, you're a grifter, spoil. Your Bohannon drivel like your soul. Coptic worse, their language is liturgical, not the rehearsed curse. While Ethiopian and Nubian cops and Cairo so merciful. Drop troops surgical, leaving your myths pitiful. You act like black folks ain't speaking Remy, give me your idiocy. Runs deep, can't study, can't even see me. Bubble brother, hush up before I knock your sugar out. Don't twist our ancestors' lore, I'll butcher your clout.
Unity in Kemet, our truth burns bright. We stand as one exposing your lies tonight. No scam or false prophet can dim our light. Kemet unfiltered, let pride takes flight.
You claim you came from Baltimore, just more trash on display. I bet the faithful flock was up, dusting your ass away. Into that fat orange cat, you're dumber than a box of rocks. Pushing assimilation as politics to shock like cheap mock. We spot you from a mile, your act just isn't slick. This is real knowledge, not your kuna logical scholarship. If you scared, you should be watching as I spit. God's flame, no bars, no game. You're done when I put you to shame.
When your twisted lies crumble and your fake talk fades, our united voice echoes, truth never degrades. From the ashes of deceit, our spirit invades. In Kemet's name, your false crown forever cascades.
Rosie aka Amir, your scams are total disgrace. Spitting away from one jargon at a crooked scheme and pace. Your twist words confused, try to carve up a space. A fraud, your fake gospel body you with no base. You try to fool slow blacks with your bogus empty guys, but your clumsy act crumbles under truth piercing eyes. Kemet stands united, no room for your deceitful art. Step aside, false prophet, your lies won't break a heart.
Unity in Kemet, our truth burns bright. We stand as one exposing your lies tonight. No scam or false prophet can dim our light. Kemet unfiltered, let pride takes flight.
Unity in Kemet, our truth burns bright. We stand as one, exposing your lies tonight. No scam or false prophet can dim our light. Kemet unfiltered, black pride takes flight.
Can you hear me, Udoka?
Yeah, Udoka in the building.
We in the building. We in the building. This is the first episode of Udoka Builds.
Yeah,
Let's
Udoka in the building.
give a one in the chat for everybody who could hear us. Just get some ones in that chat for everybody who could hear us. We want to make sure our sound is loud and clear. For this amazing episode with a legendary creator in Udoka. We're gonna wait a little bit for everybody to hop on in. Everybody who can hear us. I see we got 5 people in the building. We got Trigger Happy. Shout out to Trigger Happy, our brother from Ghana, in the building. Trigger Happy's always been a really, really faithful supporter of this channel. One of the day one. So shout out to Trigger Happy. I just want to make sure we can be heard by everybody. And if you can hear both me and Udoka, we in the clear. So I think we can, I think Trigger may be the only person who's awake right now. Who can give us a 1. So we can get this started. For those who are already in the building. So Udoka, do you wanna start by explaining that image to the right that we have there, that avatar? What does that represent?
That's Ogun. That's the divine representation of achievement, blacksmith, metalworking, war, transformation. It's a principle that is common across all different African ethnic families, but in the Yoruba ethnic family, it's known as Ogun.
Ogun. So, do you have a similarity of that within the Igbo society as well?
Yeah, the common concept in Igbo is actually Ikenga. So Ikenga is a symbol of achievement as well. In the right hand, it carries something like a knife, and in the left, it carries the object of achievement. So similarly, that's the force and the principle that is analogous, or at least related to Ogun.
That's what's
in
up.
the Igbo concepts.
That's what's up. So, for everybody in the audience, this is the inaugural episode of Udoka Builds. So, what would you say that you plan to accomplish within this presentation? Like, what do you want to leave the family with?
I want people to have a broader perspective of what has happened on the African continent as pertains to production and the manufacturers of the essentials of living for people. And then beyond just a little bit more clarity as to what is happening, a perspective on what can be done to resolve those circumstances and the issues that are on the continent. So it's going to be interactive. Hopefully we can get some questions in the chat, and I'd love to dive deep in other areas, all the areas in relation to those two things.
So overall, how would you describe yourself? Would you say that you are a Pan-Africanist? Are you assimilationist? Like, how would you describe your ideology?
I'd say first and foremost, I'm an African. So whether you would say Pan-African, that's the unity of all African people around the globe, certainly that's a concept that resonates with me. Assimilation would not be something that resonates with me, probably the opposite. I'm a traditionally rooted African. I'm someone that enjoys uncovering the higher concepts that came from our ancestors in the past, the beliefs that moved us forward or led to great achievements.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of my profession and the work that I do, I'm an engineer, I'm a businessman. I've stood up an agricultural processing business in Nigeria. along with great support and collaboration with others, other business partners and like-minded people, we've been able to grow that company as well. So that's my introduction.
So where can people find you outside of this broadcast?
So just as I've been able to build up a company that works on building real things, I actually lead an initiative on Substack. It's called Udoka the African. And what we do is we help Africans to build real things with their hands,
Uh huh.
whether they're machines, whether they're tools, whether they're agricultural technology and processing equipment, hardware. Um, the goal of the initiative is really to reduce dependence of Africa on imports, finished manufacturers, and actually grow meaningful production and manufacturers for the continent.
Yeah, I
This is
see.
yeah,
So what is it? Is it Substack? It's udokatheafrican.substack.com.
exactly.
I'm gonna see if I can bring that up for the fam. And while I'm doing that, just can you talk about like what inspired you to go on this journey with what we're talking about today? Because we're gonna have a pretty uncomfortable conversation, for those who would be, assimilationist. So what inspired you to go onto this pathway?
For me, I've had a lot of inspiration, I think, from my ancestral line. I've grown up actually outside of the continent, but I remember growing up hearing the stories of my grandfather and how he built things in our community, engineered things such as running water and set up schools that were well intentioned. Now, today, at least, we know obviously there were limitations, but I think he always put a high premium on helping people in his community to advance and to move forward. And in my understanding of what has happened on the African continent, I think I'm just living in that legacy of, okay, here are the problems that our people are facing, and what better to do but to work on the things that will move us forward past those challenges.
That's what's up. That's what's up. Yeah. So I have the Substack on the screen. It's udokatheafrican.substack.com. There's a lot of great information there about African technology and, just African industrialism. And that kind of takes us to the topic of this interview, right? So you already mentioned that you are a traditionally rooted African. You have an engineering background. You are a businessman. You have opened up agricultural processing in Nigeria, and you are looking to connect with like-minded Africans across the planet, right? So can you take me through your exact mission and how you aim to fix some of the industrial problems of Africa?
Yeah, so the specific mission is for Africa to be an economic power um, in the world, being able to provide for its own people, not based on, the mercy of others, or not based on having to be subservient to others, but
Welcome
not
to
being
and the
under anyone's
triumphs
foot,
of modern
being able to
African
stand
revolutions. You won't find
and build meaningful progress for the people that inhabit that region of the world. Um, the solution, or at least the path that most very strong nations around the world have taken, is actually that of producing things, manufacturing. Um, it is impossible to end up as a wealthier nation if you are exporting unfinished goods and then you are importing finished goods. So the purpose of and the mission behind what we're doing is encouraging the mentality of building real things. And again, um, it's not to say that there's not a role that foreign investment can play, but there's something to be said about knowing what we stand for and what we have to do, and starting small and just doing things that are aligned with our own values instead of exclusively thinking that foreign actors are going to fund the things that we actually need. So this is more of a grassroots mentality, because the things that we need to build, we cannot just be waiting for foreign actors to fund it, because sometimes they don't really have an incentive to fund it. And I'll talk through some examples of why that is.
So a lot of people make the claim, like, so some of the institutions that you're going to talk about, for many people on the African continent, they would say that without these people, we wouldn't be able to have bread, we wouldn't be able to have water, we wouldn't be able to have some of the things that we love and some of the things that we enjoy. So what would you say to those people who would believe that no, we need some of these companies to be able to sustain ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, just at a high level, I would say that there's a lot of perspective that we're missing. So, just to use West Africa as an example, a large portion of the land, when the colonial invaders and occupiers initially arrived, they claimed that they owned the land, and then they essentially put a tax on the people to pay for living on the land. And this led to people having to go for jobs to earn income in foreign currencies so that they could pay their taxes. And then in paying those taxes, the only way for them to pay those taxes was to do labor on foreign companies that were producing the things that they actually end up purchasing in the market. So there was a whole lot of things that were already in place. Like, there was actually a lot of the essentials and the livelihoods being met by our own domestic industries, but due to a lot of those influences, that was essentially undone. Um, so the purpose of what we're doing is we're remembering what actually had happened, and remembering that it's not just that we're doing something that's brand new. We're actually just uncovering and reinvigorating what we've already been able to do in the past.
What about those who say that, the Westerners, they've made Africa more comfortable, especially within the cities? And if you want to go back to, a past, a glorified past, that's like going back to the countryside, the village, traditional African spirituality. That doesn't fit with the modernism and where we want to take Africa with respect to Western investment. What do you have to say to those people?
To those people, I would say the way that we used to measure the success of our nations was the number and the percentage of hungry people, um, the number and percentage of people that are in good health. I think what we've seen in more recent days, as recent as this year in 2025, we do see that a large portion of the continent is still like very hungry and struggling to meet ends meet. This wasn't actually the reality before. There was an overabundance of food. There were a number of remedies to different ailments that people had faced. There were not a constant. As much as people try to make the case that life expectancy and certain diseases have been cured, there is an actual historical record that shows that Africans in the past did have long lifespans. They did have very advanced ways of staying healthy. And when I say advanced, I just mean like natural ways, like ways that we now are calling like innovative in the West, or they're saying it's organic, or we're understanding how to eat more properly now. All of these things were already understood before. So if you're just imagining what the diet of the average African would have been in those days, fruits and vegetables, fresh foods, a lack of fried foods, a lack of preservatives, and all these like harmful and toxic ingredients that actually cause disease. Um, you would know that a lot of Africans actually did and do live very long. Some people will go into their communities, they'll find that it was regular for their older grandmothers and grandfathers to surpass 100 years. Like it wasn't extremely uncommon, and this wasn't due to the advances of any, you know, insulin or um, HIV medicine. It was just living naturally. So I think it's important that these folks that have a perception that Africa owes a lot of its well-being to foreign actors, they actually should, um, yeah, really consider the fact that folks had a lot of those um, strong factors prior to the Western incursion.
No, that's a great response. And Trigger Abby in the comments saying, if anything, the problem is Western style governments and economy. And if I'm gathering correctly, what you're intimating is that really the Western culture and way of being is making Africans sick at all levels.
Yeah, and I'd say there's just a lot of incongruency where people have adopted a mode of life that maybe was well suited to another geography, another um, ecology, and experience that another set of people had gone through. We've seen ourselves adopting this way of life, and maybe it's worked for them in whatever ways it is working for them. But for us on the continent, we're seeing that the reality is adopting this lifestyle has led to environmental destruction. We've seen conflict. We've seen a lack of collaboration, and just not being able to look at things that are productive and beneficial and collaborative for us. So that's what I'm really pushing us to look more closely at. Like what are the factors that will bring us closer together and actually have us with a common goal,
Mm-hmm.
rather than just this artificial goal of trying to emulate or to copy another people.
No, definitely. That's really profound. And ultimately, what you're saying is that like we were gonna have to develop the courage and the strength to be able to stand on our own, without any of these foreign influences, and without any of the negative propaganda that says that we can't accomplish what we will.
Exactly. It's the confidence that, in my view, comes when we look at previous examples of what was done. I know people in recent days have heard of some of the stories of Mansa Musa. Um, you may have heard of the stories of other African societies, such as the Benin Kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there are numerous examples actually in history where Africans not only were manufacturing and producing, they were trading continentally. Some of them, I believe, even in Uganda, or Zimbabwe rather, they were trading with China and India, and they had access to boats and ships. This was in, I believe, between the 1500 and 1700. So yeah, it's quite feasible to get back to what we were doing, and I think if anything, we're just interrupted,
Yeah.
rudely interrupted, as a mentor teacher would say. But we can get back to what we were doing.
So how do you see the Sahelian states? What do you think the role is of the Sahelian states with respect to all of this, and with respect to building independent institutions, independent firms? What do you think their role is?
Yeah, I think some of the recent headlines that I'm seeing, and just for context, I haven't necessarily seen on ground what the lived reality is or spoken to anyone in, let's say, Burkina Faso or Niger. But I do think the headlines are showing some promising signals. I'm hearing of uh, Ms. Arikana, or Ambassador Arikana Chimoriquao. She was the one who really exposed what was happening with France and keeping foreign reserves and all kinds of you know, in all kinds of things that are just off.
Yeah.
She basically has said that um, Burkina Faso and Niger, they're now renegotiating some of the agreements that they've had on like the raw materials, and in fact, some of them are establishing factories to do processing for their finished goods, or to turn the raw materials into finished goods. That obviously is a great promise. I'm hearing of them investing in their primary healthcare systems. Contrary to what a lot of people believe, the West actually advocates austerity policies in order to repay back loans. And austerity policies means that we want you to put less money into your primary education and healthcare. Um, so that the West might say, yes, we brought you education and healthcare, but in the same breath, they're also pushing African governments to have very little budgets to invest in these crucial sectors. And what we're seeing is that the governments in the Sahel are now becoming a bit resistant to this Western financing mode of dependence, and then adopting their finance policies in terms of how the budgets are used, and then having bad outcomes. And instead, they're saying, "Well, you can keep your money. We're gonna just invest in the things that make sense, even if we have less capital available. We're gonna invest what we have in what matters to us, instead of investing what you have for what matters to you." So that, I think, is a good trend. We'll have to keep watching and monitoring, and if anything, in some ways, finding ways to participate or otherwise get involved. That's the way I look at it, at least.
Perfect. So, going back to what we were discussing before, when I do a random AI search for Unilever, right? And this is a company we were talking in the background. It says Unilever is a global company with significant presence in Africa. It operates in various countries and markets. They have a strong focus on local sourcing, with over 95% of products sold in Africa being manufactured locally, and more than 2/3 of ingredients coming from the continent. Unilever's African operations include manufacturing plants in countries like South Africa, Kenya, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia. So from the looks of it, it seems like Unilever is concerned with local sourcing. It's concerned with local ingredients. And I mean, they're trying to build themselves as a Pan-African country. I mean, would you agree with that framing?
No, I wouldn't say so. I think that would be like saying that Shell Oil is a Pan-African company. Shell also sources its oil from the African continent. Mining companies that are Canadian and Swiss owned and U.S. and European owned, like they as well sourced their minerals and gold from Congo. And I would not call them Pan-African companies. I'll call them Western owned companies that operate on the African continent. I don't believe that more of these kind of companies will solve the issues that we have on the continent, but I do believe that a company like Unilever branding itself in that way is very misleading. And just to tell you a little bit more about Unilever, in particular in countries in West Africa, Nigeria, they manufacture a lot of things that people use on a day-to-day basis. So Unilever makes Blue Band margarine. That's like the butter that most people in Nigeria are using. They make Knorr cubes. These are essentially flavoring cubes similar to Maggi in Nigeria. They make close-up toothpaste. They make a toothpaste that is very popular in Nigeria, very well advertised. They make Lux soap, Vaseline. They make all kinds of skincare products and cosmetic products that are, they're used by a lot of people. But the real issue actually is that they're not owned. It's not really owned by African people. And I'll kind of talk a bit more about why this is an issue. So the story behind Unilever is actually even an interesting one. I'm Burna Boy, he's a famous Afrobeats artist, probably top 3 right now. I'm curious if anyone in the chat has a perspective on who's number one, but Burna certainly is up there.
Who's your
And
top
he,
three? Who's your top three before we continue?
for me, I got to give respect to people that have a track record and have, moved the continent as they moved the continent, which is, well, let me put this out. I'm gonna say the commercial top three, and I'm gonna give you more of like a cultural, or at least a more more cultural few artists. So the commercial top three for sure has got to be Wizkid, Davido, Burna Boy.
Yeah, that's fair.
A close, extremely fast-growing fourth would be Rema. He probably has to do a few more projects before really being in that top three, but he said there's a big four now.
Yeah,
That's in one of his songs. One of his songs, he that was one of the bars, and I think he definitely deserves a lot of respect as well. But those four definitely are the ones that have achieved a lot commercially, and there's a lot actually that can be said about Afrobeats, by the way.
yeah.
That would be probably like a different
Well, on that note,
different topic.
Which artist do you think speaks to the issues that you're speaking about with respect to like Unilever and similar companies?
So Seun Kuti, who's the son of Fela Kuti, he's someone that actually will really go to the root of the matter. He'll even speak about these issues on videos as well. So
Mhm.
he's someone that is informed and not afraid to ruffle feathers and speak truth to power. In terms of an artist that has alluded to some of these concepts and brought them at least into the forefront commercially, that would be Burna Boy, and he has a song called Another Story on his album African Giant, and there's a part where he speaks about how in the narration at the beginning, it speaks about how Nigeria essentially was like a business deal. It started as a business deal. The country itself was like a business deal.
Yeah.
So the British government essentially bought a large portion of Nigeria from the Royal Niger Company for about 900,000 euros. And this Royal Niger Company was essentially like a militia that was going around like land grabbing and destroying homes and claiming that they owned, the land and the resources of the people. And essentially Unilever acquired this Royal Niger Company, which again was like land grabbing and stealing resources. So Unilever, even though we wouldn't say Unilever itself colonized Nigeria, it is very accurate to say that they acquired a business entity that had networks, privileges, and infrastructure that this private militia, this private land grabbing group of violent men that were just going around stealing land, like, attained. And just to give a little bit of context as to like how that manifests in the everyday lived reality of the people, is that they use those networks, they use those privileges to have exclusive licenses to use the colonial governments to construct roads, private roads that worked for only their business, to have tax exemptions. They were not paying any taxes for large periods of time. So you might be operating in what is called Nigeria, but they're not expected to, pay taxes. And they leveraged political connections. So whenever there were local alternatives or local industries, they were crushing and collapsing and suffocating those industries. So if you were trying to start a soap factory, for example, to compete with Unilever in the 1970s, they would have made it very difficult for you to have the ability to import certain machines that would be necessary for your production. The banks wouldn't have been able to give you any loans for you to expand your production. Meanwhile, Unilever would be receiving tax holidays and very favorable rates when it came to even foreign exchange and the amount of profits that they were able to reap. And then even today, they still control a majority of these supply chains and manufacturing and have very low rates on and their imports for some of the raw materials that they're using. And meanwhile, if you are an African trying to do the same thing, the government is not going to extend you those same privileges. So this is just an example of how this company leveraged their colonial background based upon violence, based upon conquest, not based upon like fair competition, in order to have this position and establish essentially a monopoly in Nigeria.
So what do they control? Because I'm a little bit familiar with the history, but can you get into the history of like the different commodities that Unilever was able to take control of from their history?
Yeah, so the raw materials that are used in um, detergents and soaps, that's going to be your that's going to be palm oil. So palm oil was uh, the major commodity that they were controlling in those days. So they were extracting palm oil, especially from the Niger Delta. This was during the time of the Industrial Revolution in Europe and in London. I believe um, the company that became Unilever was initially called the Labor Brothers, and that was a soap company. So what they were doing was finding ways to incentivize Africans to export their soap, export their palm oil, or sorry, export their palm oil, their palm kernel oil, into, and then even like other forms of raw materials to produce soaps. And that is what led to them being able to gain this very strong monopoly on a lot of the products that Nigerians and other West Africans are using today. That's like the raw material that's used in margarine and butter, um, certain spices and additives that go into the cubes and even um, cosmetics and soaps and skin creams. Like this is all coming from palm oil.
Yeah.
There was something really interesting that happened though, which is Unilever actually. Oh no, Unilever actually was one of the companies that did have a lot of relationships in the military as well. So a lot of the times we think of military rulers in Africa as like some of these corrupt actors, and they're just independently grabbing a bunch of guns and taking over things and enriching themselves and their cronies. But what actually usually happened, and even to this day still does happen, is you have some of these Western companies that basically leverage Nigerian and African militaries as like their own militias. Because that's even what was happening in those days. They were doing like conscriptment. They were recruiting African people that were mostly the ones going around shooting other Africans. And again, like some of them are promising them things like having access to resources and homes and visas and ways that they can have access to new sets of privileges. And it's very easy to find. You speak to 10 people, anyone, you can certainly find like one malicious minded person that is very happy at the prospect of being able to have wealth at the expense of their peers. And some of our people took that offer and they used the machine gun and put the rest of us in a pretty poor situation.
So when we talk about China, you talk about even countries like India, like different countries. Russia is part of this. They support their own indigenous brands. So like Unilever being a foreign company trying to come in and impose themselves as an Pan-African company. What would be like a Nigerian or an African alternative to Unilever? And do you see, the local governments supporting these alternatives?
Yeah, the one of the solutions is certainly looking at more indigenous brands that do make alternatives. I know, for instance, in Ghana, you can find locally sourced shea butter and soap. I think to the point that I made in the beginning earlier about a move to more organic products as opposed to like these mass manufactured products can actually end up being more healthy for you because you know exactly what is going in the ingredients. You know that things are being more locally sourced. You know that they're organically made. A lack of synthetics that are contributing to um, poor health outcomes. So I mean, the benefit is twofold. Number one, yeah, you can help focus on more indigenous, locally sourced, and ethically produced alternatives. But then also, yeah, it's helping those businesses to grow and essentially establish more of a national footprint. I know that another solution is around owning the supply chain as opposed to letting foreign actors control it.
Yeah.
Um, there are companies in Europe that control large amounts of land in Africa by way of plantation, and I believe in the future some of these land holdings are going to be revoked. So I don't think people should be too worried about that, but I do think um, that is one way that we can begin producing things of our own, building cooperatives, building local processing hubs, um, and then essentially just establishing agreements that favor domestic production and not always try to look for a foreign actor to come in and be the major actor. Instead, just find ways to um, start small, start with people that are African, and just build up capacity gradually, just like other countries have done.
So, what would be your top five? Like, if a Nigerian or a Ghanaian or a Kenyan said, "Hey, you know, I don't want to use Unilever anymore." Like, what are some top five companies that maybe have a bigger footprint that they should consider?
Um, if I have to think of a few soap brands,
Mm-hmm.
Dudu Oshun is a very great soap, and they've been able even to expand outside of Africa into the U.S. and I believe Europe as well. Dudu Oshun is a great soap. African black soap.
Yeah.
There's another brand that is called Ashanti Naturals. Um, there's there's certainly a few others that have grown and had a lot of commercial success. I'm trying to remember this one actually based in America. Um, it's actually an African American owned one that's done pretty well. Is it Shea Moisture?
Shea Moisture. I
That's
remember
one.
them being sold. I think they were
Oh, were
sold.
they?
I'm not sure if that's true, but like I remember Shea, like there was a big deal about it being
Oh,
sold to
wait,
like
this is the
Robin.
problem. It's owned by Unilever.
Yeah, yeah. See what I'm saying?
So yeah, no, we're gonna take that one back. We're gonna take that one back. In 2017, Unilever
They bought it.
acquired Shea Moisture.
See how
So
they buy it.
unfortunately, yeah, this is how it happens. This is how it
Well, what do
happens.
you say to those black-owned companies who they build their company and then Unilever gives them a good deal? They give them a good check. What do you say to those companies?
I think we have to put more public pressure and awareness. I wouldn't say we can look at those founders individually and in isolation and necessarily say that they were not individually incentivized to do that and to their shareholders and creating a nice financial outcome and from their perspective it's probably a no-brainer, but from an African perspective this is not going to be something that bodes well for the African consumer that is using that product. We've seen time and time again where a foreign entity will acquire an African owned entity and reduce the quality of the products that they're producing for African people. So I don't think this is really a long term beneficial pathway for us to take. And it shouldn't be our mode. We shouldn't view this as like as African people as like the highest form of success, selling to a Western company. We're not going to go too much into um, what's going on in the music industry, but in some ways, something there are similar dynamics where you have local talent coming up with local owned distribution and or no, not local owned distribution, with local owned record companies, and they sign deals, licensing deals with Western distribution companies, and then Western companies now end up reaping the majority of the profits off of the African talent and artists, and that's exactly what is happening when we're selling the rights to our companies to Western companies. We're reducing our own power in the name of getting like a short term win or payday, or you know
But what you're saying,
you know an ability to get some capital, but it's not having access to their currency doesn't necessarily mean that we have a higher level of power.
no,
Our
yes,
goal should,
yes.
as African people, should be like, what is actually making us more powerful? And we should have that conversation instead of just saying, oh, like, what is the money game, and who's going to be able to cite that they've partnered with a Western company.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Trigger Happy brought up a really great point. And when you see these black founders selling their companies to Westerners, and then Westerners are able to use the leverage that they built to take more control of the economy, that is essentially the goal of black capitalism. Like the Madame Tinubus, the Tipu Tips of the world, that is the goal of black capitalism. And what you're saying is you are advocating for more of a social or communalist cultural response to say there's a bigger goal other than just making money.
Indeed. Unfortunately, integrating into Western capitalism makes the West more powerful and makes Africa weaker. So we need to look at the bigger picture and not just the micro context of this individual company, but like if 100 companies, if 1,000 companies do the same exact thing, that means Western companies own all of our production on the continent. And let's look at countries and around the world that are, ascending or becoming economic powers. If the same thing was being done in China, like imagine, would that make China powerful? Probably not. So
No.
Chinese government is not going to allow those kind of things to happen. They're going to clamp down on Alibaba if Alibaba is taking too much Western capital and under the guise of a Western controlled agenda and objective.
Yeah.
You're going to have Jack Ma like being summoned to essentially the capital in China, and being really oriented and like, hey, like, you know what? We know you've achieved a lot of success. We know that the Western media has shown you, given you your a lot of admiration and adoration, and you've grown this company with the support of Western capital. But you are a Chinese man, and you will be operating in the interest of Chinese people. I think from a Western perspective, this can seem like an authoritarian and a very mean, or a little, just a little bit a very central,
Like it
a
sounds
very
communist.
aggressive approach.
Yeah, they call it
You can
communist
see
socialist. That's
you
what
can see
it is.
communist and socialist, but from a Chinese perspective, they're trying to make sure that their own people are benefiting from their country.
Nationalist.
They're nationalists, yeah. So I think the West would do the same thing if they were in the same position, which is why they did what they did with by dance. They forced they're forcing a Chinese owned company essentially to sold. You just you have to look at national security. Each nation should look after its national security, and that's the end of the story. I think everyone can agree to that point. So that's what I'm talking about, is how do we look at the national interest of African people. So I know another thing that you had brought up earlier was the way that Africans are, choosing to kind of collaborate with Western companies or sell their the rights to their company. There's actually a really great example that I wanted to speak about, and this is the example of Nestle. So what a lot of people don't know is Dangote, he's the richest Black person alive, the richest African. He's a Nigerian businessman. He just set up a massive refinery for oil, which is good actually. That an African now is refining oil instead of only Africans exporting crude and importing finished. But yeah, he has a conglomerate. He has a cement company, a sugar company, a number of other transport company. He has a number of companies. He's the richest African, richest black person, but he comes actually from a very wealthy family. So his essentially his grandfather um, was the richest businessman on the African continent as well. And the way that he became the richest businessman is because he was one of the most prolific groundnut merchants in northern Nigeria. So he was buying groundnuts and supplying it to Western companies. So in 1918, that same Royal Niger company that became Unilever, they were looking for an agent to purchase groundnuts for them in large quantities. We're talking about hundreds, thousands of tons. And his great grandfather, or something, his grandfather's name was Dantata. He responded to the offer, and at the apex, he became like their lead agent for groundnuts. And at the apex, he was purchasing more than 50% of all the groundnuts for the uh, the Royal Niger Company, essentially, or the United African Company that became Unilever in northern Nigeria. And as a result of all of this economic activity and supplying of groundnut and a number of other businesses that he was doing, he became the richest businessman in that region. And then even when there was a bank, there was a very early bank of British West Africa. They opened a bank in Kano in northern Nigeria. Dantata was one of the people that really financed the initial capital that was going into the bank. He became a prolific actor, not just economically, but politically in Nigeria. And when Nigeria was even first formed in 1960, his son, Dangote's grandfather's son, essentially, Sanusi Dantata, he now became a director for Shell BP, the joint venture in Nigeria, which was essentially one of the most powerful companies in Nigeria that led a lot of the oil exploration and what became the petro capital of and the chokehold that industry has put on the Nigerian economy in terms of the Western dominance and influence, and also let me say the Western exploitation, not dominance, but just exploitation. And yeah, I think a lot of what we are looking at is the fact that the people that we are looking at as heroes and the people that we're looking at as Forbes richest person, like there's a little bit of a backstory to how that came about, and sometimes it's not always the most beneficial thing actually for broader sets of Africans. So I would urge us, instead of worshiping material wealth that like individuals have, we instead look at, okay, like this region of Africa, this community, like does everyone have running water? All right, check. Does everyone have the ability to eat? Check. Is everyone well clothed? Check. Are we producing and building things that are providing all of those living essentials? Check. These are the things that we need to be working through, and celebrating the people that are delivering on any of those kind of check boxes, putting those in our top 100, putting those in our top 10, instead of just admiring wealthy or let me say rich individuals that are just collaborating with Western influences.
So why do you think that he? Because when you ask him, he's like, "I built it from scratch," and he's so like hell bent on telling people that he built it from scratch. Why do you think that he hides his history this way?
Because if the broader set of African people really knew the backstory of what he did or how he ascended to those heights, I think there would just be a reduced premium on like the hero worship of him in the way that we currently do it. And again, there are some actions that he's doing that are good or that are, net beneficial for the African people. But I think what we've seen is that um, a lot of the way that he was able to get to where he got to, it has a backstory in the colonial story, and it has a backstory in um, special privileges that he got as a result of being very close with those kind of actors, exclusive import licenses, destroying local competitors. Like these are not stories that he would want to tell because it would make people to not want to be affiliated with his brands. It would not be good for business if people were to know these stories. But over time, these stories will become more known, more broadly um, understood. And at that point, in my view, that's where we're going to see an increased emergence of local alternatives because people will now begin to see that, yeah, we really shouldn't just be depending on these entities that are controlled by foreign actors, but instead we should actually build local capacity and create jobs that will lead to more meaningful lifestyles for our people.
Well, I'm gonna play devil's advocate. So you're saying that we can't buy from the Westerner, the foreign investor, we can't buy from them, and now we want to worship a black billionaire, but we can't worship a black billionaire. What I mean, do you want us to just live in the village? Do you want us to live? What is the solution? Right? Because we need companies like Reckitt for healthcare. Like we can't trust the village, witch doctors. We trust Western medicine. So what do you have to say to that?
Um, I would say that analogy would be like me saying um, a Western man that is going to like a fortune teller should be the way that we look at their medical system and um their logic systems. Like, oh, like why don't we look at their witch doctors? The west was quite known for having a lot of witches and doing witch trials and and putting people at stakes for accusing them of being a witch. Like in Africa, what we had is just people that knew the correct things to eat, knew that once they were out of balance, what to do to get back into balance. So going back to uh, say that we're going to the village or which that is just Western propaganda. African production should be something that we can agree is useful. If we can agree African production, if we can agree that producing things that we use is actually a priority and useful to us, the next step is actually taking steps to achieve that. And yes, like even Dangote, who said he started from scratch and started small, like anyone, you can start small in anything. You can start in your garage, and before you know it, if you're doing the right thing, if you're using the right ingredients, if you're getting the right adoption, like your companies are going to grow. So we're not saying that we don't want big companies and big outcomes in Nigeria. We're just saying that we want companies and people that are working for the interests of African people first and foremost, and not for the interest of any foreign actor.
Nah, facts. So, what would you say about, um, just the idea of the hospital system in general, right? Because when you're dealing with these Western companies, going back to the African medical system, the West, in comparison to Africa, is more developed and they have the modern, industrial like medical system. So how can Africans compete if Africa, like as you said, many people would see Africa as not developed, still focusing on the witch doctors and not focusing on so-called modern medicine. So how can we have an alternative to these hospital and colonial medical type of companies?
Yeah, so one of the main ways is looking at the companies that are doing it. So there are two sets of companies. There are the companies that are actually African owned and producing things that Africans can benefit from a medicinal perspective, and then there's Western owned companies that are doing that. So just to kind of give a little bit of context, there's one large example I can use, and the example is Reckitt Ben Kisser. So this is an English company, another British company, and they produce very common products in Nigeria. They produce Dettol, an antiseptic. They produce Harpic. They produce Mortin, like an insecticide. They produce a lot of things that are used by a lot of Nigerians, and what they do is they pushed historically a very heavy advertising message, and that message has been Western equals clean, African equals dirty and inferior. When Nigeria had initially got an independence, they were essentially going. So even before independence, they were going to the African continent on these public health missions, and selling their products like Dettol and Harpic as like a cleaning product. Africans had a way of already, disinfecting and cleaning their own environments again. But they basically were telling Africans that whatever that they're using is not science, or it's not effective. So they're saying use what we're producing. We have the superior systems. And as a result, they basically did away with indigenous manufacturing systems. We had like herbal disinfectants. We used the lemon. We used the pawpaw leaf. We used neem. We used different forms of indigenous medicines. We had specific herbs and leaves that we knew how to resolve coughs and fevers. And all the West really did was take this knowledge, crush it into very tiny fragments, and package it into a pill, and then resell us the same exact thing for a much higher cost. So if we can just recover and unbundle these things that we already had in place, all of a sudden you're going to see a resurgence of domestic industries, the production of medicines and disinfectants that Africans are making and Africans now are using. Because what we've definitely seen is that importing medicines, importing the formulas of Western companies, not only leads to enriching those companies, but also leads to a much lower standard of life for African people, because they're using things that are not being manufactured with the longevity of African people in mind. It's being engineered for the maximization of products. So if they're going to dilute some of the product, or if they're going to make sure that they're not really investing in, they're making sure to invest more in dependence rather than healing and actual independence.
No, definitely.
These are not going to be great outcomes. So it's better, in fact, to look at other natural brands. Pax Herbal is one that's a Nigerian domestic one. They produce antiseptics, natural therapies. There's another one. I'm trying to remember the name, but there's an Igbo lady that made this company, Parsamedol.
Not Dudu Osun or Tropical Naturals.
I don't remember the name. If I remember it, I'll definitely say it. But they're an indigenous drug company. There's also one that's called the Orange Company, I believe, and they're doing pretty well. But I think they do white label, where they do essentially repackaging. Don't quote me on that, but I don't know exactly what they do. But there is, uh, I will remember the name.
Yeah, so I think that
I will remember the name.
this
I don't
is
remember the name right now. Emzor. Emzor is actually the name
Emzor.
of this company.
Emzor. How do you
Yeah,
spell that?
Emzor. Yeah,
How do you spell that?
EMZOR. Yeah, and this one's actually founded by an Igbo lady in Nigeria named Stella Okoli, and she did a really great job creating a great pharmaceutical business. And yeah, the fact that it's still owned by her um, is very commendable, and they've expanded throughout the continent, and they do a great job, especially with children's medicine for fever and other kinds of uh, temporary ailments that people have.
No, definitely, definitely. And I'm just thinking about just having the conversation about the colonial medical system and these colonial pills and different things that we use to make ourselves feel good. And I'm just thinking about just the medical system in general because I tend to be more in favor of alternative sources and skeptical of like the traditional medical system. And in doing research, you have other countries like China and India with the Ayurvedic system, China, who has their own like doctor of Chinese medicine, where they've actually developed their traditional medical system to be, in tandem with an MD or with an osteopath. Do you know of any like Nigerian institutions or Nigerian hospitals or any African institution who is actually trying to develop African traditional medicine in the same way?
Um, there's a company called MDOS. So they actually are an equipment supplier. I would hope they're doing some form of production for their clinics. I know they're establishing a number of clinics. Um, I do think in the beginning, at least, they were doing the import of machines. I do hope that there's and eventually, of course, like sometimes people will start importing, but they try to quickly work towards manufacturing and production. But they are a company I think that's trying to really do some work in terms of domestic African owned clinics. Um, there are I mean there are a lot of private hospitals in Nigeria. A lot of underfunding, a lot of uh, challenges that they have maintaining like very like strong quality, and there's a lot of investment that needs to go into these kind of companies in terms of like the energy, the grid, being able to have reliable access to power that will really enable them greatly. But yeah, I think the key is, as you're alluding to earlier, just setting up the mentality, setting up the idea that even at a young age, like young kids and children should even be learning about what it takes to make um, local medicines, what it takes to make like disinfectants, and how to stay healthy, how to avoid the spread of disease. Um, One can apply these lessons and just learn to live in a more hygienic way and reduce how much they even need to go to the hospital in the first place. I think even if someone wanted to make one thing that I really advocate is like the schools really doing little projects, and you could actually have a little child make a bar of soap. You use a little bit of coconut oil, a bit of sodium hydroxide, use water, and then add maybe a scent to it, such as lemon. You can add color in form of dye, and when you mix all of these things together and then you allow it to harden, um, you have soap. You have a bar of soap, and I think there's something to be said about allowing a young person to be able to produce something like that. For Udoka the African, that's part of what we like to do. We like to actually show interested builders in how to make these local alternatives themselves at a very small level, at a very grassroots level, and then even how to go to market, how to get a couple initial sales. These are some of the things that I think will lead to the broader solutions. And yes, I gave you the example for a bar of soap, but we can apply the same thing to medical machinery and equipment. After all, some of it just comes down to certain metals and irons and software that you now program to work in a certain way. The instruments, yes, you might have to like look at welding or you might have to look at machining, but we have some of these things actually on the continent. And if we can just start small, we can make small steps, and then before you know it, we can make bigger steps. Then we can make even larger steps, and before you know it, we'll be manufacturing and looking at uranium. We'll be looking at nuclear. Um, that's where we have to get to, right? But this way in which I'm advocating is just about getting the mentality at the younger ages,
Yeah.
and I believe that's really the key.
No, definitely. And when you mention nuclear, I'm a huge proponent. I'm pro power. I think that, nuclear fusion is something that every African nation and researcher should be looking at. And that's something like we're going to have to do a show on that in its entirety. But when I look at the market, like Africa is still dominated, even with respect to the modern financial system. Africa is dominated by the informal market. Like the marketplace is the dominant area where most transactions are made on the continent. However, some of the mainstream corporate products from Nestle to Reckitt and all of these, even illegal drugs, are sold informally. And a lot of that has to do with colonialism, like the Jangwi with respect to the Bamilekes, the Asusu with respect to various West African populations was banned and taken underground. But how, in your mindset of building, can these our own indigenous made local products in our own informal markets have more prestige and value than these imported corporate, European Western products?
I think it's the celebration. It's the celebration. Like imagine in class if someone made that indigenous soap, made that little class project, and we now like took an opportunity. We had the bring your parents to work day, and we gave that child a ribbon. We really celebrated. We had a competition maybe to make the best kind of soap, and then maybe we have that soap as the award. Maybe we use that in the school instead of using a foreign alternative. Instead of using Unilever soap, we now allow the child's family to be the one producing the soap, and we maybe buy it at a slightly cheaper price. Maybe the price is more affordable, but it's more the profits are accruing to that child's family. I know this sounds like a very like I know this example is not like that. It's not really a common of a concept, but I think we need to start a conversation around this kind of uh, this radical shift. Like, how do we get money in the hands of our people for making things that we use? And I think what I've just described is actually like a way you could do that. Um, we now are celebrating, not just celebrating in words, but celebrating in terms of a contract. And then we're now ending the contracts with the foreign government, giving the contracts to our domestic people, creating jobs in the families and in the community of where people are living, and then having a higher quality of an end product that we're using on the skin of our people. Because that it's more organic, that it's something where all the ingredients are going into it, the people that are making it, accountability is there, and that's to me a pathway to get there. So that is at a small level. That's like at a primary school level, but then maybe at a broader level, we could even think to do that at the state level, at um, the federal level. Like let us celebrate more of our domestic producers. Maybe we have a certain prize or a certain every month. There's one domestic producer that we're celebrating at an even higher level. Everyone is now aspiring for those kind of awards. What I'm saying is like right now today, just to use maybe a relatable example for those that are like Africans in America, Africans are in America are they're going after the Super Bowl. They want to win a Super Bowl ring. They want to win a Grammy. They want to win an Academy Award.
Yeah.
But how come we are not aware of the awards for Africans that are producing things, Africans that are
Yeah. That's a
um,
great point.
putting putting good products in the hands of our people and owned and controlled by Africans? These are the things that I believe that we should be celebrating and having award ceremonies for, having our lavish banquets and our after parties and high celebration and coverage for us. That's what we should be doing. And I believe if we begin at the primary school level with the example I gave, we can progressively work to the regional level, to the state level, to the federal level, to the global level, and we'll begin looking at awarding and celebrating the achievements of doing things that benefit African people.
No, definitely, definitely. And even as you're talking, like I can, remember, when I was a kid, younger, because it's been a while since I've been to West and Central Africa. I was actually in Eastern Africa more recently. But I remember like the Fantas and the Fantas tasting so good on the African continent, maybe not having as much preservatives in them. I remember my mom even always used Maggi cubes, and I didn't even know that Maggi cubes were actually being industrially processed. Like I had no idea. But like the taste is cultivated for these different things, and it's an addiction, and it's hard to get off the Western addiction. But what would you say, in terms of the addiction, like how could you, like a company like Nestle, how could you fight a company that is so ingrained in our taste buds like Nestle? Like how is that even possible?
For me, it starts with knowing the history of what they've done. Once you see a brand in a certain light, it's hard to unsee it. Brands tell very positive, cuddly, and very happy narratives about themselves so that we can feel safe around them. We can feel, oh, after all, like I saw a commercial with the McDonald's Happy Meal. So surely, like, this is going to make me happy and joyful. We have this ingrained within us as a child, but when we watch a movie like Super Size Me, we may reconsider whether having a Big Mac and fries a couple days every week is actually long-term beneficial for us.
Yeah.
We may reconsider whether that is actually a good living decision. So for Nestle, let me give you the equivalent of the Super Size Me. Nestle, it was a Swiss company founded in the late 1800s. They sold infant formula, right, to European mothers. That was what they were initially doing. And after the World War, or let me say the Great European War, they expanded aggressively into Africa. And what they did is that they leveraged the structural adjustment period.
Mm-hmm.
So they expanded into Africa and they were operating in Africa. But what they did is, at the time of independence, they formed, so-called indigenous companies. But just because you have a company that is incorporated in Nigeria doesn't mean that it's controlled by Nigerians. And I know I'm using Nigeria a lot as an example. I have a Nigerian origin in terms of my ethnic background. You'll see this example in many other countries, right? I'm just indexing a lot more on Nigeria because that's what I can speak to and that's what I know. So in Nigeria during the 1980s, the structural adjustment program was implemented due to the IMF and the World Bank. And what that led the African governments to do is give exclusive rights and privileges to Western-owned companies. They gave them import waivers, tax holidays, and exclusive rights to sell their Maggie cubes, their Nestle milk, and their baby food. Not just like in specific. It's not like they got the right. Okay, you can sell in these supermarkets. Like they, in some cases, had the exclusive right to sell into school feeding programs. They were on the radio programs that were owned by colonial and Western owned media companies, and they were the ones getting all the airtime on why what they have is the most nutritious and the most beneficial for people. But meanwhile, what that did is it pushed out the local seasonings that Africans already had. Africans already had crayfish, ogiri,
Mm-hmm.
iru. We
Mm-hmm.
had like seasoning that even tastes better when you use soup. When if you make the best soups that you can make, you're not using Maggi cubes. Maggi is just kind of a quick microwave solution. It's almost like the Big Mac for spices. You are essentially just using a preservative infested uh, spice cube to produce things. And yes, it was more accessible in the sense that like you don't have to maybe buy all these other individual components to bring them together, but it's also not as healthy.
See, I
So
always thought,
yeah,
and that's good branding, because I always thought Maggie was indigenous African. Like, I would have never imagined that it would have came from some type of corporate source.
yeah, and the issue as well is there was a lot of again because I mentioned it earlier in the on this call we've talked about how um you had militias that basically came and invaded and demanded people to begin paying taxes on their own land in foreign currency. So you had people that had to not just look at these jobs as a form of prestige, but they're looking at those jobs as a form of survival. Like someone in our community needs to go work at this company to earn a British pound, whatever that is. At that time, people didn't know like what is. All I know is this person said I need to give them 10 British pounds at the end of each month, or we're going to raise down your community and steal the rest of the land that we've already taken some of it. The land that now you're living on. If you don't pay us, we're gonna destroy your land. You're gonna destroy your house. So yeah, I mean, and people are like, yeah, like it looks like we have to get with the program or we're gonna lose our house. So um, some of those actors were the first people that were now beginning to work at a Nestle, um, underpaid, treated poorly, but suffering in silence. Some of them they would tell their children, or they would tell the younger generation, like, oh yeah, like I was one of the early people working at these companies, and it became a form of prestige, almost in a form of like a Stockholm syndrome dynamic, where you're like you're with an abusive invader that forced you into this position, but because you being in that position is helping others now to survive, it becomes a form of prestige. Like, oh, this person went in and was able to deliver what was necessary for us to survive. But then no, we've lost track of that history. So what I'm saying is the process of undoing this is understanding what happened, and then you understand, okay, if this is what Maggie has done to get to where it is, then why are we still doing the same thing? Why not in fact look at producing our own local alternatives to this foreign company?
No, that's a very very good point, and I'm thinking about as you're talking about this, Obadele Cambone's analysis, where I think Trigger Happy was the one who shared this in the Discord server, um, and he spoke about how you know even the languages, the way that we use languages, like if you said Madase in Twi, like some people use the intonation of American, like when they say thank you, they say Medase, and like it changes the meaning of the word. And even as you're talking about all these corporate products, even in African spirituality, when someone, infers on the Abusums or the Odinani or the Isheshe of the Yoruba, you'll have the different, Abusums or spirits ask for Nestle and ask for Heineken and ask for these different corporate products. So even within the spirituality and the libations and the different things that we use to venerate our culture, it is being colonized by the Western imperialists through corporate capitalism. So, and this leads into the next topic, like libations, right? The ancestors want good libation. They don't want you to give them trash, right? The spirits do not demand a faulty drink. But how can we be able to industrialize and Africanize, even with respect to African spirituality, with the preponderance and the dominance of a company like Heineken, right? How is that possible? And Pan African James, shout out to Pan African James in the chat. He's saying the volume's low. I don't know if anybody else is having that issue, but we're gonna continue on if nobody else is having that issue. But back to the question, like a company like Heineken, you know, libation, spirituality, how do we, you know, counteract the colonial influence with respect to you know, the impact of corporate capitalism?
Yeah, so in the context of companies such as Heineken, we're talking about a company that is responsible and behind a lot of the most popular beverage brands in Nigeria, Maltina, Star, Amstel, even in East and Central Africa. They're behind Tusker, Primus, Walia. They also run a lot of the bottling and distribution operations amongst a lot of the even some of the domestic actors, just due to their scale. They call themselves proudly African in their ads, but their ownership and their profits are actually proudly Dutch, given that Heineken was founded in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Last time I checked, this is not an African company, but
Yeah, my dad used to love Heineken. Even when I was coming, I used to see him always drink it.
and it's a little problematic. Like, even though it can be a pleasant memory when you look at the commercials, when someone is at the Super Bowl, they're drinking a Bud Light, or
Yeah.
you're on the beach, you're drinking Corona. Like, understand, like, this is all advertising. Like, a lot
Yeah.
of these things, that these personalities that we think are us, like, it's not. It's the idea that one person is trying to put into your head about who you are and what you're doing, and it's leading to that person earning money and you spending money with that person and that brand.
Yeah.
And this is what happened in Africa. Heineken pushed the Western style beer into Africa as a status symbol, where people were essentially going. Prior to that, we had palm wine, we had herbal
Yes.
bitters, we had
Yes.
the more traditional forms, ogogoro, we had kai kai, we had indigenous. We have indigenous ways of producing alcohol, but because it was like in a Western bottle and bearing a Western brand name, all of a sudden it became something of status. And even in their manufacturing process, these Heineken brands were taking on subsidies from the government on barley and hops, the raw materials that are used in the production. They were blocking efforts from domestic producers on using cassava and sorghum at scale to do the production of indigenous alcohols. Because if you ferment cassava, you actually can produce alcohol. You can produce ethanol. You can also produce alcohol, and this is just the colonial way of doing the same exact thing that we've been talking about, which is suppressing domestic efforts in order to promote their own brands. In order for us to undo a lot of the damage that has been done here, we need to become more cognizant of the materials and the ingredients that are used in our beverages. We need to look at supporting local brewers. I know actually there's one in Ghana. They produce Alomo bitters.
Casapreco.
Casapreco, yeah.
Yeah.
Kalahari. That's the company. Yeah, the company is Casapreco, and yeah, they produce Kalahari. They produce Alomo bitters and carbonated drinks. They're a local beverage company in Ghana.
I love flavored carbonated drinks. I mean, to me, like, that's like the best invention ever. I don't drink soda, but I do love a carbonated drink.
Yes. We may have to look at the ownership of Nigerian breweries. Some of the things that we're gonna really have to do is like have a very transparent a board that looks at the ownership of African companies, like an index. Um, I know that Nigerian breweries does well international breweries. I'm just even like taking a look to see the ownership. I know they produce Hero Lager. This may be a European company. Yeah, it's a subsidiary actually of a German company. Um, Warsteiner. So I won't include Hero because it actually dovetails back to a European entity. But I think what we really just have to do is audit our brands, audit the biggest brands, and look for those that have African ownership, and begin putting our support behind those kind of brands, and doing away with the kind of the colonial influence ones. And again, starting at the school level, starting at what kind of milk are we providing for the children? We talked about Nestle already, but the same thing now applies to the hotels. The hotels that we stay at, they always tend to have little bars, and they have fridges, and they stock drinks for the customers. If we had local alternatives in those bars, people would still buy them. It's just about what is accessible to the people. It doesn't mean that because you're a hotel, you have to have Heineken, you have to have Guinness, you have to have other forms of alcohol that are owned by Westerners. Like let's start by putting a locally owned brands there, and then even having a little bit of education. The hotel can do something. The hotel can say, "Oh, well, these are brands that people have produced in this very place that you're staying." People will buy it. People will be like, "Oh, that's interesting. Like, I'd like to try what is being produced here. Oh, the flavor is different. Oh, this is the flavor I've never tried." Like, people will try it out, and before you know it, a hotel could be helping make a domestic brand more popular. Um, so again, this is just an example where we have to understand what is being produced, how it's being produced, who are the owners of the production, and then where can we essentially go to stock those products, and how do we communicate what those products are doing in a way that are making our people to be interested, to patronize, and to purchase.
So, if I'm understanding you correctly, you think that in a full spectrum perspective, even with respect to, let's say, a Dibia who asks you to bring him a Heineken for a libation, it will be a societal materialist endeavor to change like the means and the mode of production with respect to these different commodities that would shift, these African spiritual traditions. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it comes back to like what is accessible. That sometimes what we see African people do is we will use the name of a Western brand to describe um, a regular concept. I think
Yeah.
in America, this is also a common concept as well. You might call a hot tub a jacuzzi. A jacuzzi is a brand.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You may call like, oh, I want some Crest.
Yeah.
Do you have some Crest strips? Whitening strips, or it can be made by any brand, but then maybe everyone knows Crest, or
Yeah.
um
Or Kleenex for a tissue, or a discus for a
Kleenex. Yeah,
frisbee.
that's a great example. Exactly, those are great examples, and I think that is what the Divya is doing. I don't think he fully realizes that um, there is like a local alternative. Maybe he doesn't really believe it's feasible, but I think if we can go to the regular establishments where people are frequenting, you go to the bars, you go to the malls, you go to the schools, you go to the churches, you go to all these different places where people are gathering, you go to the assemblies, you go to events, traditional events, weddings, and we just really try to introduce things that are produced by our own people. In a matter of years, you'll see that the Dibyas themselves could be requesting those very things that we're talking about.
No, definitely, definitely. And it's kind of thing about being full spectrum and having a cultural revolution, because that's essentially what we're talking about. Because even, in this call, I understand what you're talking about, and I understand the need to have, indigenous industrialization. But even in my own memories with family, fond memories with my parents, I can think of these brands. And this is the power of advertising and the power of control. And even with spirituality, I can see how deep seated it is, even for those who, have left or who do not confide in Abrahamic traditions, to still have this colonialism and corporatism there. So, what you're calling for is going to take an in-depth immersion into, revolutionary culture and revolutionary practices. And it's going to take a lot of development for us to be able to see the value in with respect to just indigenous commodities, indigenous industrialization, and Africanization, full throttle.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. That reminds me of a very great quote I heard recently. A lot of what we call revolutionary in the concept of African is actually just logic in the context of other nations,
Yeah,
like common logic.
yeah, that's
We
true.
are a Western country. We're going to operate in the interest of our Western people. Anything that can present a conflict or a potential threat to that uh, is in essentially a national security risk. President Trump is saying that for China, for things that are being manufactured in China that are presenting a national security risk, he's going to take a position where he's going to do things that are going to lead to Americans having greater shares of interest or better structured deals, and this is what we have to do in Africa as well. Like we have to just think about what is in our national interest, um, logically,
Yeah,
and eventually we'll begin looking at it as just like common logic and not just like revolution.
no,
It's
definitely.
revolution now. Maybe it's considered revolution now because we're thinking that operating in the Western interest is logical
Yeah,
as Africans. And to me, what I'm really pushing is like it's very illogical. It's very illogical.
definitely.
It's logical for a foreign actor because yes, it's you're helping them to attend nice private schools and afford you know beach houses and have low prices for things that they need to survive. But you're now creating a very high living cost for our own people, having them, people in the West, they spend maybe 5 to 10% of their budget on food. Um, in Africa, often it's 40 to 50%. So you're talking about people not really having the same amount of disposable income to live a life that is easier and a life that is not full of having to struggle to make ends meet. We want people to live a fulfilled life as African people. We want people also pushing and moving towards greatness as our people have done in the past.
No, definitely. And Trigger Happy has a great point. Like we have normalized insanity, doing things that are of common sense. They're deemed insane, like wearing African clothes, going through stairs. And I can think that like the way that I see it is when I see someone in African clothing, I either think that they're going to a wedding, a funeral, like a baptism or whatever. Like in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, there must be a special event happening. But in reality, like, why don't we always wear African clothes? Like, we should always. And it just goes to show you how deep westernization is, where, for those of us with pride, the only time that we actually wear our traditional clothing is special events as opposed to like, everyday life.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes,
So
I'm definitely aligned on that point.
hundred
I'm definitely
percent,
aligned on that
hundred
point.
percent. Yeah, we've been streaming for exactly 99 minutes, and I'm proud that we got this far because there was a few mishaps. We took probably about the same time trying to figure out the sound in the background. But this has been a very very amazing first episode of Udoka Builds. This is going to be the first episode on a continuous show where Udoka's just going to come on board and just give us his engineering and technological expertise, and African cultural expertise with respect to how to Africanize the industrial process and how to move African nations forward in the 21st century. So with that, do you have anything else that you want to let the audience know? I put your Substack in the channel, Udoka the African with a K.substack.com. That's how you can reach him outside of this platform. Is there anything else that you would like to leave the audience with?
Yeah, absolutely. Just reach out on Substack, subscribe. I also do have a call to action, which is those of you that are in this chat. I encourage you to build, to produce solutions that work in the interest of African people. To not be afraid to start at small, at whatever level, and anything that you want to do, feel free to reach out to me, because part of what we're doing at Udoka the African is helping people to work through the initial steps of what it takes to produce something, whether it's a 3-ingredient combination to produce something that people use on a day-to-day basis, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's a machine, whether it's hardware or form of equipment. We live in the age of AI, and we can very effectively turn ourselves into experts in producing very simple things, sourcing the ingredients to make those things, and then being able to use it as an instrument or sell it as a product, provide it as a service. I'm very keen on helping Africans that are interested in doing this, both on the continent and both out of the continent, but with interest to be working on the continent. So it's a call to action to any African that is interested in this kind of work, if you know other Africans that may have interest in building in this kind of way, feel free to connect them to me, and I'd be happy to work with them.
100%, beautifully said. Again, this is the first episode, first edition of Udoka Builds. I'm happy to have Udoka on deck. He's going to be here very, very frequently, and we finna have a great time. So with that, I hope everybody who's listening enjoyed, especially those of you who are listening on the playback. This will be available. Hit the Cash App, $Comgyverse if you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to Udoka Builds. And with that,
Welcome and the triumphs of modern African revolutions. You won't find this connection anywhere else. If you're new here, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell so you never miss an episode. Share this video with friends and family. Become a channel member or join our Patreon. The links are waiting in the description. Let's honor our sacred legacy and ignite our future together.
Shut up, you dumb, you sound like a coon. Get out, stay clear of this room. We proud, we black, rich, and forever stay paid. They lied, sick, and sprang from the soil they mislaid. Their tales a sham, cooked up by scammers who toil. So shut up, chief X, you're a grifter, spoil. Your bohanna drivel and your soul. Coptic verse, their language is liturgical, not the rehearsed curse. While Ethiopian and Nubian cops and Cairo so merciful. Drop true surgical, leaving your myths pitiful.
You act like black folks ain't speaking, read me, give me your idiocy. Buds deep, can't study, can't even see. Bubble, brother, hush up before I knock your sugar out. Don't twist our ancestors' lore, I'll butcher your clout.
Unity can make our truth burns bright. We stand as one, exposing your lies tonight. No scam or false prophet can dim our light. Human unfiltered, let pride take flight.
You claim you came from Baltimore, just more trash on display. I bet the faithful flock was up, dusting your ass away. Into that fat orange cat, you're dumber than a box of rocks. Pushing assimilation is politics that shock like cheating mock.
We spot you for a mile, your act just isn't slick. This is real knowledge, not your kuna logical scholarship. If you scared, you should be watch as I spit. God's flame, no bars, no game. You're done when I put you to shame.
When your twisted lies crumble and your fake talk fades, our Our united voice echoes, truth never degrades. From the ashes of the sea, our spirit invades. In Kemet's name, your false crown forever cascades.
Ghazi aka Amir, the scams are total disgrace. Spitting a whip on one jargon at a crooked scheme and pace. You twist words, confused, try to carve up a space. A fraud, your fake gospel body came with no base. You try to fool slow raps with your bogus empty guys, but your clumsy act crumbles under truth piercing eyes. Kemet stands united, no room for your deceitful art. Step aside, false prophet, your lies will break a heart.
Unity in Kemet, our truth burns bright. We stand as one, exposing your lies to lies tonight. No scam or false prophet can dim our light. Kemet unfiltered, let pride take flight.
Unity in Kemet, our truth burns bright. We stand as one, exposing your lies tonight. No scam or false prophet